When they opened that door, the world of an entire family collapsed. But wait, to understand how this moment happened, we need to go back a little in time. What you're about to discover in the next few minutes will change everything you think you know about destiny, choices, and forgiveness. But first, if God touches your heart, subscribe to our channel and support us with your like, leaving a comment with your name and where you're watching from, so that in the next video, I can send you a kiss or a hug. This is David, a young man of just 22, full of energy, dreams, and plans for the future. The only child of Sarah, a hard-working woman who did everything she could to raise him alone after losing her husband far too early. Sarah was the kind of mother who dedicated every second of her life to her son. And David, even though young, understood that. He wasn't just her pride, he was also her greatest companion. David had a passion, music. Ever since he was little, he would grab anything that could make noise and turn it into an instrument. At 10, he received a used guitar as a gift, and with it, he began to build his dreams. He would spend hours strumming, making mistakes, starting over, but always with a sparkle in his eyes that showed this was more than just a hobby. It was his soul expressing itself. At 22, it finally seemed like doors were beginning to open. He had been invited to play in a small local band. Nothing big, but for him, it was a huge step. Rehearsals, laughter with friends, plans to play in bars, and maybe someday record his own songs. David felt like life was just beginning. It was a Friday night, an ordinary evening, or so it seemed. The sun had just set, and the simple neighborhood where he lived was filling with the usual sounds. Kids running, neighbors chatting on their porches, cars passing slowly. David kissed his mother quickly on the forehead and left, excited to meet his friends. At that moment, nothing seemed unusual. But destiny was already preparing something that would change not only David's life, but his entire family's. At the small bar where he and his friends usually gathered, David laughed loudly, played a few notes on his guitar, and dreamed out loud about the next steps in his music career. He spoke about how he wanted to buy a new instrument, how he wanted to see his mother smiling in the audience when she watched him on stage. His friends laughed and cheered him on. Life seemed light, simple, almost perfect. But something else was happening across town. A man in a different bar was also spending his night. He drank excessively, laughed at unfunny jokes, and in his eyes was a mixture of pain and emptiness. This man's name was Michael, and what no one knew was that Michael carried a past directly intertwined with David's life, even though both had long gone their separate ways. While David talked about music, Michael drank to forget mistakes, regrets, poor choices. He was the kind of man who seemed to be constantly running from himself. And that night, when he decided to leave the bar, he no longer had control over his own body. Even knowing he shouldn't, he grabbed his car keys, started the engine, and sped down the dark streets. On the other side of the city, David was saying goodbye to his friends. It was late, and he knew his mother worried when he took too long to come home. He strapped his guitar to his back, adjusted his jacket, and began walking through the quiet neighborhood streets. The silence of the night was broken only by distant barking and the sound of his own breathing. But that silence would soon be shattered. As he turned the corner, David heard the sound of a revving engine in the distance. At first, he didn't pay much attention. He was used to reckless drivers speeding through the narrow streets. Still, A chill ran down his spine. It was as if his body sensed something was wrong. The car was coming fast. The headlights suddenly lit up the street where he was walking. Instinctively, David raised his hand to shield his eyes from the blinding light, and then everything happened in seconds. The impact was brutal. A loud crash echoed down the street, followed by the screeching of metal and a body slamming against the asphalt. David fell, motionless, while the driver, stunned, braked a few meters ahead. The silence that followed was broken only by the car engine still running and the screams of neighbors rushing out to see what had happened. David was unconscious. His guitar, now shattered in pieces, lay beside him. And that night, the dreams he carried seemed to be broken along with that instrument. As neighbors called for an ambulance, the driver stumbled out of the car. The stench of alcohol was strong. He looked at the body on the ground, and his eyes filled with horror. He recognized something. He recognized that face. It was David. And in that instant, Michael realized he had just run over his own nephew. The ambulance didn't take long to arrive. Sirens cut through the silence of the night, flashing red and blue across the streets. Paramedics jumped out quickly, unfolded a stretcher, and rushed to David, who lay unconscious on the ground, struggling to breathe. His body trembled slightly, but his eyes remained closed. While one paramedic checked his vital signs, the other prepared oxygen and emergency bandages. Time seemed to race against them. Every second without response could mean an entire life cut short. Michael, the driver, still stood there, frozen, his face drenched in sweat, tears filling his eyes. It was as if his body had been paralyzed in time, unable to move. Furious neighbors shouted, "He was drunk! Hold that man, call the police!" And that's exactly what happened. Minutes later, a police car pulled up and officers approached him. Michael tried to mumble words, tried to say he knew the boy, but his slurred speech only fueled the crowd's anger. They handcuffed him and pushed him into the patrol car while David was rushed to the hospital. Sarah, David's mother, got the call in the middle of the night. Despair took over her in a way no words could describe. Within minutes, she threw on the first clothes she could find, tied her hair back quickly, and ran to the hospital. Her heart pounded, her legs trembled, but her maternal instinct was stronger. She had to see her son. When she arrived at the emergency room, chaos unfolded before her eyes. Doctors running back and forth, nurses pushing stretchers, and in the middle of all that was him, David, unconscious, hooked up to machines, his face bruised, tubes all over his body. Sarah felt the world spin. She clutched the wall to keep from collapsing. She tried to get closer, but a nurse firmly stopped her, explaining they needed space. Sarah's heart shattered at the sight of her son in that condition, but what she didn't know was what she was about to discover. A short while later, a police officer approached her. With a serious look, he asked to speak with her privately. Sarah, her eyes red from crying, tried to listen, but the words blurred through her pain. Then he said something that nearly made her legs give out. "The driver responsible for the accident is your brother, Michael." Sarah felt as if she'd been punched in the chest. Michael, the boy she grew up with, shared toys and childhood memories with, the brother who had been lost to drugs, violence, and abandonment. She hadn't seen him in over 15 years. To her, he was just a distant memory, an old wound she preferred not to touch. And now, fate put them face to face again, not in peace, not in a warm reunion, but in the cruelest way possible. Michael had put her son between life and death. Sarah broke down in tears. Her body shook so much she had to sit. It was as if the past had come crashing back, ripping away every drop of peace she had built over the years. Hatred and love fought inside her. She wanted to hate her brother. She wanted to scream. She wanted him gone forever. Yet, at the same time, she couldn't forget the child he once was, the boy with the easy smile who had run through the streets with her when they were kids. Meanwhile, in the next room, Michael sat in custody, handcuffed, his head bowed, tears streaming down his face. He knew there was no excuse. He knew that, even without meaning to, he had destroyed his nephew's life. And now, there was no turning back. The doctors worked tirelessly. Hours dragged on, every minute feeling like an eternity. Sarah prayed, begged God not to take her son, to give him another chance. And at the same time, her mind kept repeating her brother's name, Michael. It was him, and that truth weighed heavier than she could bear. The hours at the hospital seemed endless. The ticking clock on the wall echoed like hammer blows inside Sarah's mind. She paced back and forth in the hallway, stopped, looked at the door of the room where doctors fought to save David, then resumed walking, as if that constant motion was the only way to keep from losing her sanity. Suddenly, a police officer approached her again. He asked if she wanted to see Michael before he was transferred to the station. Sarah froze. Her first instinct was to say no. She hated the thought of facing that man, but deep down, something pushed her to accept. Maybe it was the need for answers. Maybe it was the urge to look him in the eye and ask, why? She was led into a small private room. When she entered, she saw Michael sitting, handcuffed, head down, face worn. For a moment, she barely recognized him. The brother she once knew was gone. In front of her was a broken man marked by addictions, abandonment, and bad choices. He slowly raised his eyes, and as soon as he saw her, tears welled up. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling, I didn't know. When I realized, it was too late." His words were desperate, confused. Sarah stood silent for a few seconds, staring at the face that had once been so familiar. Her heart was at war. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream, to blame him. Another part wanted to cry, because despite everything, he was still her brother. "You destroyed my life," she finally said in a low, almost whispered voice. "You put my son between life and death." Michael lowered his head, unable to face her. "I know, and there's nothing I can do to change that. I've been a mistake from the start, but I never imagined I would hurt you this way." Sarah clenched her fists tightly. The pain inside her was unbearable. But before she could say anything else, the door burst open. A doctor rushed in, calling her urgently. Her heart raced. She ran down the hall, through the doors, until she reached David's room. The scene was desperate. Monitors blaring, nurses pressing gauze against wounds, doctors shouting quick orders. David's body shook, and for a moment, Sarah thought it was the end. But the doctors didn't give up. They administered medication, adjusted the machines, fought with everything they had to keep him alive. Sarah stood at a distance, tears streaming uncontrollably. Every second felt like an eternity. Every beep of the monitor stabbed her heart. She remembered her little boy running through the yard with his guitar in hand, making up silly songs to make her laugh. She remembered the smile that always lit up their home, the times he said, "Mom, One day I'll make you proud. I'll step on a stage and sing just for you. And now, all of that was at risk of being lost. The next minutes were pure tension. The medical team fought as if it were a battlefield, until finally the monitor stabilized. David's heart began to beat regularly again. He was still unconscious, but he had survived the first great trial of that night. Sarah collapsed to her knees, thanking God that her son was still alive. But the battle was far from over. The next days would be decisive. David might wake up or never open his eyes again. And deep down, Sarah knew it wasn't only her son's fate at stake. Michael's return had ripped open an old wound that had never healed. That accident was not just an accident, it was the most painful reunion fate could have written. The days that followed at the hospital were the longest of Sarah's life. David remained unconscious, connected to machines keeping him alive. Doctors explained his condition was critical, but there was hope. Every morning was a new test of emotional endurance. Sarah arrived early, sat beside his bed, held his hand, and spoke to him, even without knowing if he could hear. "My love, you're strong. You'll make it through. Remember when you said you'd stand on a stage and sing just for me? Well, I'll be in the audience. Just promise me you'll come back." This routine kept her going. Between tears and prayers, she drew strength not to collapse, but a ghost haunted her mind, and it had a name: Michael. No matter how hard she tried to focus only on her son, she couldn't stop thinking about her brother. Childhood memories flooded back, sharing a room, fighting over toys, protecting each other at school. Michael had always been her protector. When Sarah cried, he was the one who wiped her tears and told her everything would be okay. But that brother was gone. Years of addiction, bad company, escapes, and wrong choices had turned that sweet boy into a broken man. And now, cruel irony had made him the one who nearly killed her son. One afternoon, Sarah was called to give a statement at the police station. There, she saw Michael again. He looked thinner, beaten down, carrying a weight too heavy to bear. When their eyes met, silence filled the room. "Sarah," he said, voice trembling, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed everything, but please believe me, I didn't know it was David. If I could take his place, I would without hesitation." The words struck her heart. Part of her wanted to believe, to rescue that brother who still lived in her memory. Another part screamed in anger. He chose to drink. He chose to drive. He chose this path. And now my son pays the price. She didn't reply. She just turned her back and left. That night, back at the hospital, Sarah sat beside David again. She looked at the tubes, the bandages, his wounded face, and then she poured out her heart to her sleeping son. "I don't know what to do, my love. I don't know if I should hate your uncle forever or try to believe there's still something good in him. But I do know this: I will never abandon you. Never." The following days were a roller coaster of emotions. Small signs of improvement appeared: a finger twitch, a slight squeeze of the hand, a deeper breath. Each tiny detail was celebrated as a miracle, but uncertainty still loomed. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Sarah received a letter. It was from Michael. The officer who delivered it explained he had written it from his cell and asked that it be handed to her personally. Sarah hesitated, but curiosity overcame her, and she opened it. In the letter, Michael confessed everything. He wrote about his life in recent years: loneliness, bad choices, constant regret. He admitted to drinking too much that night, but said that when he saw David lying on the ground, something inside him finally broke. He begged for forgiveness, not as a man asking for freedom, but as someone pleading for a chance to redeem himself. The letter ended with a line that echoed in Sarah's mind. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but maybe I still deserve the chance to change." Those words shook her. For the first time, she felt there might be a possibility of rebuilding. Not easy, not simple, but maybe necessary. And then came the second turning point. In the stillness of the night, as Sarah dozed beside her son's bed, David opened his eyes. It was brief, but enough. Sarah woke with a start, grabbed his hand, and saw his eyes trying to focus. Tears immediately rolled down her cheeks. "My son, you came back. Thank God you came back." David couldn't speak yet, but his tear-filled eyes said everything. He was there, he was fighting, and in that moment, Sarah felt there was hope. Not just for her son, but maybe, just maybe, for the whole family. David's awakening brought a wave of hope. Doctors explained that recovery would be slow and delicate. There were risks, possible sequels, but the mere fact that he had opened his eyes was considered a miracle. Sarah never left his side. She held his hand, told him stories, recalled moments from his childhood. David couldn't talk yet, but he responded with slight movements, a blink, a hand squeeze, signs that he was listening, that he was present, battling. Meanwhile, across the city, Michael awaited trial. News that his nephew had survived reached him through his lawyer. Upon hearing it, he wept like a child. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope inside. But Sarah remained torn. Her heart was a battlefield. On one side, the pain of a mother who almost lost her son. On the other, the memory of a sister who still saw behind all the mistakes the boy she had once loved so dearly. The day came when she had to decide. She could let justice take its full course without interference, or she could, in spite of all the pain, extend a hand, not for freedom, but for change, for redemption. That night, sitting by David's side, she gathered courage and spoke to him, unsure if he could fully understand. "My love, your uncle did something terrible. He put you in this bed, and I don't know if I can forgive him. But I also remember the boy he once was, the brother who protected me, who shared his food when we had nothing. I don't know what to do. Should I hate him forever or believe he can change?" David's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't speak, but slowly, with great effort, he moved his hand and squeezed hers. Sarah understood. It was as if he were saying, "Don't let hate win." The next morning, Sarah made her decision. She told the authorities she wanted her brother to face justice, yes, but also to have access to rehabilitation programs, to real opportunities for change. She wasn't asking for his freedom, she was asking for humanity. When Michael heard this, he broke down once more. In his cell, he wrote another letter, thanking her for not giving up on him, even after everything. He said he would carry the weight of his mistakes forever, but now he had a reason to try, to honor the second chance life had given him. Meanwhile, David advanced in his recovery. Painful physiotherapy sessions, sleepless nights, slow progress. But with each step, each regained movement, the flame of life grew stronger. Sarah was always there, cheering, supporting, encouraging. Months passed. The image of David standing for the first time after the accident was one of the most emotional moments of Sarah's life. His movements were painful and clumsy, but filled with determination. Each step carried the promise of a future. The accident that had nearly destroyed their family became a turning point, a rebirth. Almost a year passed since that night. David, still recovering, could now walk with help, play a few notes on the guitar, and even smile again. His body carried scars, but his soul seemed stronger than ever. He knew he'd been given a second chance, and he refused to waste it. Sarah, too, had changed. Pain, fear, and anger had given way to resilience. She had learned that hate corrodes more than it frees, that forgiveness isn't forgetting, but choosing not to let the wound consume your life. And Michael, the man once destined for failure, also began to transform. Serving his sentence, attending support groups, writing letters regularly to his sister and nephew. In them, he spoke of regret, but also of hope. Even behind bars, he wanted to fight to become a better man. Sarah read every word with tears in her eyes, not because she had forgotten the pain, but because deep down, she still believed no one is ever completely lost. Life for that family would never be the same. The accident left scars, physical and emotional. But it also brought a lesson none of them would ever forget: the fragility of life, the importance of second chances, and the power of forgiveness. One day, at home, David picked up his guitar again. His hands still trembled, his fingers lacked the agility they once had, but he strummed a few simple chords. Sarah, sitting in front of him, began to cry. Not tears of sadness, tears of victory. He smiled, looked at her, and said in a weak voice, "Mom, I'm back, and I'll play again for both of us." In that moment, Sarah realized she had triumphed. She had overcome tragedy, fear, bitterness. She had won because love still remained. Life is like that. In the blink of an eye, everything can change. Sometimes we're struck brutally, unfairly, painfully. But there is always the chance to turn pain into strength, tragedy into wisdom, resentment into forgiveness. And you? What would you do if you were in Sarah's place? Would you hand your brother over to justice without looking back? Or would you dare to believe that even the worst mistakes can be the beginning of change? Think about it. If this story touched you, share it. Maybe someone you know needs to hear this message today. And if you believe stories like this can transform lives, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and stay with us. Because in the end, what keeps us alive is the ability to start over. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to follow more emotional stories like this one. Your support is very important to us. And tell me in the comments, do you believe that in situations like this, forgiveness can truly transform lives?